on your nose.
Hello.
We're recording.
All right. So let's start at the beginning. When did you first come to Kansas City?
I was actually born at the Menorah Hospital January 1st, 1932.
And most people who are not close to my age or yours, they think of Menorah as being out in Overland Park, but now we're talking about the one that's just off Brush Creek.
Yes, it was about 46th and Troost. It was since torn down, and that's where the Stowers Cancer Institute is. But it was the creme de la creme of hospitals when I was born there, not because I was born there. And I'll never forget that birth. I mean, when I was born, the doctor took me out of the womb and held me upside down. He thought I was so ugly he slapped my mother.
Tell me about your mother and father. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
My father was born in Chidnev, Russia, came to the United States in the mid-20s. My mother's parents were born also in Russia, not far from Kiev, and they came to the United States about the early 20s, just in time for my mother to be born. She was born in Kansas City, Kansas. And my dad and mom got married in 1931. I was born a year later. Their first home was the St. Regis Hotel, which is still standing.
Right.
And it's in Paseo and Linwood. And Mom used to tell me my diapers flew from the roof there.
So you were born in 1931, so you're just starting to hit the height.
I was born in 32.
32, the height of the Depression at that point.
Right. Of course, at my age, I didn't know anything.
Did they think you had anything to do with that, or any connection?
Well, I've been blamed for a lot of things, and I think that there must have been a group that wanted to blame me for that.
What was it like growing up in Kansas City in that era?
It was fun. I had a great childhood. I had a kid brother named Morton, and he's 18 months younger than I. And then 11 years later came along my sister Paulette. But I remember the first home I can recall, 3 or 4 years old, was at 66th and Locust. Behind that home was nothing but a big vacant field. And I remember my dad had a Graham Page car, and he had cut across that field as a shortcut one, and got the car stuck. And I remember they had to get a team of horses and mules to pull the car out of the mud. It's funny what you remember, but that's one thing that sticks in my mind. Then we moved to 52nd and Garfield, and I started school at Francis Willard, which is at 50th and Garfield. School's still there. And when I turned about 8 years old, we moved to 74th Terrace, right off of Holmes, not a block north of the Tower Park, they now call it.
Was that considered almost out in the country at that point?
Well, 75th Street was the city limits. You went south of 75th Street, you were in the county. And to me, it was a mansion. It was one of the first air-conditioned homes. The people that had owned it before had taken the air conditioning unit out of an old theater called the PIC, P-I-C, PIC Theater, and they had put it in the basement of this home and hooked it up as an air conditioner. Dad would never turn it on because he thought it would get too cold in the house and we'd get pneumonia. So I don't know what the hell we had it for. But I grew up in that home. My dad went into the United States Navy in 1943, and in 1945, I went off to Kemper Military Academy as a freshman in high school. And I was there 2 years, and then 1 year I didn't want to go back to military school, so my folks let me go to Southwest High School for my junior year. Then my senior year I went back to Kemper and graduated. And my kid brother Morton, he also went to, and then I went on to the University of Missouri. And after almost 4 years of military school and strict rules and regulations, I was a wild man when I was a freshman.
Yeah, you've been cooped up.
Yeah, I didn't have anybody to tell me yes or no, and I didn't do real well in the grade system. So after a year at MU, I didn't go back. I went to Kansas City University, or Kansas City Junior College.
Which became UMKC?
Or was that? That became nothing. Now I don't think it's anything now.
Okay.
Across from Westport High School. But while I was there tooling around, the Korean War got busy, And Harry Truman sent me a letter. He said, Stan, you're not doing anything. I'd like to have you come and join us. We have a police action in Korea. And so I said, oh, yeah. Well, I forgot to tell you, I had also met my wife. She was also at MU. And that's another story. Beautiful woman. And we got married when I was only 19 and a half years old. And she was 20. She was 6 months older. And I had graduated from the academy with a commission in the Army as a second lieutenant if I wanted to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, complete a 90-day course, and I would have been an officer. But because I had just gotten married, I resigned my commission. I didn't want to go at that time, and I'll be darned if a few months later I didn't get drafted as a buck private. So I was really unhappy I didn't take that commission. And I got to serve for my country, which I'm proud of. 8 years, 2 years active duty during the Korean War, and then 6 years in reserve. And then I was discharged honorably in 1960. So
what year were you married?
The first time I got married, July of 1951.
And then your oldest child, when were they born?
Craig was born in 53, while I was still in the service, and he didn't like me to say this, but he just turned 60. But if he were to walk in this room right now, you wouldn't think he's any older than you.
Right.
44.
Right,
yeah.
exactly, 44. Yeah, right.
And, well, I don't think I look my age either, and you're supposed to say, no, you don't.
No, not at all. I don't even, yeah.
And anyway, then my second son was born in 55, Jeffrey. And my third son was born a year or so, 2 years later, and unfortunately we lost him in a horrible car accident almost 2 years ago. That was my son Jack,
right,
who was named after my dad. And but that's life as we know it.
Is part of your entrepreneurial spirit, does that come from your dad?
Yes and no. I admired my dad, but you know, he was kind of a old Russian, you know, you did what he said, or you know, you got to meet the bill. And in those days there wasn't such thing as child abuse or so forth. I mean, if he said go left and you went right, then you got a left and a right.
Right.
And but it wasn't until years later that I really understood him. I admired the guy. Here's a man without a college education, came to this country with, you know, empty pockets like a lot of immigrants did in the 20s. And at the time of his death, I mean, he was a millionaire. You wouldn't know it. He was so not close to the book that he was cheap, but he just couldn't stand a braggart or a show-off. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget when I bought that 49 Jaguar coupe. I had to park it 2 blocks away from his home. He wouldn't let me. He just thought, he called me a cake eater, which meant, you know, who do you think, you know, show-off. He couldn't stand that. When he bought his first Cadillac, when we lived at 75th off of Holmes, I'll never, we had a detached garage, and he would call my mother from his office and say, I'm on my way home, and this was before garage door openers, and she'd have to go out and open the garage door, and he'd drive right in the garage and shut the door, because he didn't want the neighbors to think he was showing off with a Cadillac.
What kind of businesses did your dad have?
Well, he started in the wrecking, a lot of people in those days called it a junkyard. He, when he came to this country, his mother, my grandmother, was told the best way to invest your money is in real estate. For some reason, she bought the property at 19th and Troost. It went from Troost to Forest and all the way up to 20th. It was just a giant vacant lot. One day my father was standing on the corner kind of looking over the property that his mother had given him. And he had a young black African-American, as you call him today, a man standing next to him who was more or less his interpreter. While they were standing at that intersection of 19th and Troost, 2 cars collided. And it was quite a wreck, and people gathered around as they do around an automobile accident. And people came running. The insurance adjuster came, and the cars were not towable. So he asked my dad, or they asked who owns this property. And my dad's interpreter said, well, it belongs to this man. He said, ask him if we can pull these cars up on this lot and just leave them here. And, you know, we'll pay him 50 cents a day for storage if he'll let him keep the cars there. So the guy explained it to my dad, as the story goes, and my dad said, okay. Well, about 2 weeks went by, and they hadn't shown up. And I think they owed my dad a grand total of $12 or $13. And so while the cars were there, a guy came up one day when, again, my dad was there with his interpreter, and he wanted the battery out of one of the cars. So it was explained to my dad, yeah, sell him the battery. It's, you know, it's a used battery. But so I think he got $4, they said, for the battery. Another guy came and bought a headlight off of it. And he began to see that, hey, you can salvage these cars for the parts that aren't damaged. Well, that started what you know today, or we knew then, as United Auto Wrecking. And all these insurance guys would bring their cars there and let my dad salvage them, and he wouldn't charge them, you know, for the storage. And then when my dad's 2 younger brothers got to the United States, some 4 years later, they opened another salvage yard called American Auto Wrecking down the street. And they grew and grew, and then when the Second World War broke out in '41, guess what? Uncle Sam needed scrap iron. Well, he had these 2 big junk yards with all these, and they started selling the scrap, and then it just went on from there.
And your dad, you said he needed an interpreter, so his English, he didn't...
Eventually he went to night school. And prior to that, when he first came to the country, I forgot to tell you, he worked for Katz Drug Company. Then Katz became Osco, and then it became, I don't know what the heck it is today. But he came up with the idea, he worked in the cigar stand. And sales tax was like 2 cents on everything he bought. And my dad came up with the idea, let's not charge tax, and people will buy, you know, cigarettes for 15 cents a pack, 2 cents tax. So it says, Katz pays the tax. And I mean, they had lines coming in there. So he was a pretty clever guy. He came up with a lot of, I don't know whether I inherited any of that, because he ended up, when he passed away, probably more than $10 or $12 million, and I ended up being that much in the hole.
Right. But it sounds like from an outside perspective, I mean, he was a real innovative person.
Yeah,
and you have a lot of that too. You did some things that nobody had done before.
Right, I guess. And so is my son Craig.
Right.
When he took over the comedy clubs, I mean, he didn't stop there. He started writing for movies. He did that Champions Forever with Muhammad Ali and the famous fighters Norton and Fraser, and put them all together. There's a picture over there on the wall. And I guess it kind of runs in the family. I guess that can be good.
Did you ever have a period of time where you were sitting still on one business before? Because I mean, from my perspective, you've got so many different things you did. You've got Save On, you've got Stanford's Comedy, you've got your running for mayor. I mean, there's 1,000 other things in there. I mean, you're constantly on the move. Don't you ever get tired?
Well, no, and I'm not tired today. I just wish I had the same kind of income. But you know, times change, things get different, and I did go from one thing, but I didn't leave one business and go to another until I was really through with what I had started at that particular time. I think after Save On, then I did the auto auction, where I took the old trolley car barn at 48th and Troost and turned it into a Midwest auto auction. We auctioned off cars for car dealers in a 5-state area. Then I got kind of bought out of that because it got boring to me. Dealing with used car dealers was no fun.
Let's talk about Save On, because I remember going there as a kid, and you know, from a child's perspective, the place was just massive, and you had all the different vendors in there. How did that all come about?
Well, again, driving down the street, Kansas Avenue at 55th Street, I saw this giant building, one-story building, that had been the Kansas Service Grocers warehouse. They went out of business, and this big insurance company owned the building and property, and they foreclosed on them, and the building was for lease or for sale. Because when I got out of the service, I knew so many of my friends that were young entrepreneurs, guys that owned, one of my friends owned a men's clothing store, one of them owned a grocery store, one of them owned a sporting goods shop. And I got to thinking, I said, what if I got all these friends of mine locally, and I rented each of them a certain amount of space in this building, which had 140,000 square feet, all open span on one floor. I said, that would be a great idea, and I would pay the rent, and the utilities and the parking and so forth, and all they'd have to do is give me a percentage of their gross sales each month. I ended up having something like 45 different departments, and plus the grocery department, and we called it Save On, and people came from miles around. It was a tremendous success to the public. It was one of the first discount department stores, or the first. One day my secretary came to me. I was the president of the company, and I like to brag, I was only 26 years old, making $35,000 a year back in '61.
That's some money back then.
Oh boy. So
well, if you could get grapefruits for 3 cents, $35,000 buys you a lot of grapefruits.
Well, what I did, she said, you know, there's a man that would like to look through your store. He's very interesting and wanted to know if you had time to show him through. I said, I'm just going into a meeting. I really don't. Why don't you show him through and see, you know. So about an hour later, after I'd gotten out of the meeting, she came in my office and handed me his card and said that he'd like for me to give him a call in my spare time. I looked at it, and it was Sam Walton. So I didn't know who he was then, but we opened Save On probably a year or two or a year and a half before the first Walmart or Kmart ever opened. And
before that, though, people would drive. I mean, if you had to go to a men's clothing store, you went to a men's clothing store. If
You had
wanted
to go, right.
auto parts, you went to an auto
Right,
parts.
and I had all those under one roof. 140,000 square feet was virtually 4 acres under roof, and I could park 1,500 cars around the building. But my problem was I was so proud of myself at that early age, driving a big Lincoln, had my home, my kids, had a nanny for my sons, and boy, I thought I was, well, I won't go into
Cat's meow.
whatever
It's
that
probably
means.
a better
Yeah.
phrase.
But instead of expanding Save On into other cities and so forth, I just stood pat. I didn't do anything but wallow in my glory, so to speak. And one of the investors I had decided it was so successful he was going to take it over by going into Chapter 10. You know what today is Chapter 11, bankruptcy. And the way he did that is that he had these contractors hadn't been totally paid for some of the construction work. And so he said he wasn't going to put any more money into it. And he owned 51% of the voting trust, not the stock.
Pay attention to this, Shelby. This is where
this is where you
the
need a lawyer.
The lawyers start making some money. This is the good stuff.
So he put us in Chapter 10, and I got booted out. And even though he wanted to hire me back, but not my other two partners, and I figured, well, I was related to the other two, and I didn't want to leave them in the lurch.
Right.
So I left, and then we went to Chicago, found a great law firm. They came back, and we won I think about a $600,000 judgment against this one investor, and he settled it for $300,000 or $400,000. And my share I lived on. Moved into Georgetown, big bachelor pad.
Oh yeah.
And
that was off what
I-35 and
oh okay.
Yeah, and 67th or something. But I had a beautiful apartment and was living on that winnings, so to speak, my lottery. Bought a new Lincoln, and I was divorced by this time from my first wife. And that was fun while it lasted. But then I had to find something to do, so I got the idea. That's when the hockey franchise idea came up, when they decided they wanted to put a franchise in Kansas City. At the time, I was dating a beautiful young lady named Sandy Eichels. You know her today as Sandy Berkeley, who had married Richard Berkeley years after.
Do you think there's any connection with that, Stan, given the fact that the place that you wanted to have the big Ferris wheel is now named Richard Berkeley? Do you think there's a little back at you?
No. Well, the funny thing is, we were together for almost 6 or 7 years, and we had a wonderful time. And she is a great gal. But then when we stopped seeing each other, she started dating Dick Berkeley. All the friends of mine at the restaurant would poke fun and say, "Hey, let that little guy steal your girlfriend," and it really just deflated my ego. So I had a big banner made I put over the restaurant building. It said I had the first lady first.
And that's probably
the city hall called and said, "Would you take that down?"
Yeah.
I said, "What's it worth to you? You want your liquor license renewed?" I said, "She's coming down."
So to put it in sort of the chronological order, you've got Save On, then you've got the hockey franchise, and then Stanford and Sons after
Well,
that.
the auto auction.
Auto auction, then Stanford and Sons.
And then, let's see, auto auction, then Stanford and Sons, Stanford's Comedy.
Right. And when did your what about the Cuban Cigar Factory? No, I'm just.
I passed on that. Fidel was being naughty. I didn't want to. I heard that that the Godfather Group was going to go to Cuba anyway, and I figured, I don't want to.
I want to talk more about the hockey franchise because I think that's an interesting process. I mean, you had Save On, which was innovative at the time, and so you go from that and you decide you want to put together a group of investors to bring, economic progress and really
Right.
Notoriety to Kansas City, being a southern city, so to speak, for hockey.
Yeah. Well, what happened? The Union Station had closed, and it was just an eyesore. There was talk about tearing it down, and behind the Union Station is 54 acres of nothing but track that was useless. It wasn't being used. So I went to the city council. I said, "Look, let's build a big 18,500 seat arena in that area. We can redo the Union Station." Kind of like the one in St. Louis. Of course, it hadn't opened either. But it could be just a beautiful department hub and so forth, kind of like what I did at Save On. And I got up in front of a packed house at the with the city council and all the council members, and Charlie Wheeler was the mayor. And I'm trying to think of the guy, George Lear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
George Lear, I mean, he was the executive, what do you call him,
Was he the city manager or county executive?
well, county executive,
right,
kind of
the
like
equivalent to the mayor, but yeah.
And they just poo-pooed the idea. I mean, there again, Stan Glazer, you're ethnic. You're not going to do anything that big. You're not in the River Club, and you're not going to do it. So they wouldn't let me. But Jay Dillingham, who was the president of the Kansas City Stockyards and
Right.
Livestock, great man. He heard about what I wanted to do, and he came to me and said, "Look, I've got about 15 acres of ground down at the West Bottoms. If you want it and you want to build your arena there, I'll give it to you." And hence, today you know it as the Kemper Arena. And
And before that, had anybody talked about putting an arena down there,
no,
attracting hockey?
no.
So
no.
you do all of this legwork. It's your concept, and you get people together to get the seed money, to have the plans drawn up.
And went to Minneapolis, Minnesota,
Right.
with a lot of different cities. Dallas was
Right.
there. Omaha was there. All of them. There were about 10 cities that wanted only 2 franchises. After my presentation, the NHL awarded Kansas City the NHL franchise based on the fact that we built a 18,500 seat arena. And that's why I went after the arena so strongly. And we formed a corporation called Kansas City Arena Limited. And I had some real strong guys in there. And they put up the seed money, and we got an architect to draw up all the renderings, presented that to the NHL in Minneapolis, got the franchise. But then there were 4 groups that wanted to own the hockey team. And again, too many ethnics in my group, and we didn't get it, and it went to a guy named Eddie Thompson. And Eddie Thompson called me and said, "Well, can you at least build us the arena? You have all the plans." We offered to do that, and then J.E. Dunn Construction Company gave us a bid of $14.5 million to build what you know today as Kemper. Can you imagine that? The Sprint Arena today costs $300 million almost.
Yeah.
Anyway, they built the Kemper with the understanding that Crosby Kemper would give $2 million towards this if they'd name it after his dad. That's why he got the name Kemper Arena. And years later, after the hockey team went bankrupt, which I knew it would, because nobody in Kansas City understood hockey or what it was
Right.
all about. And, I mean, they had tried to skate 2 or 3 other hockey teams years ago. None of them ever went over. The Blades, if you remember
Right.
them, they didn't go. And I
Well,
think...
we had the Kings there for a while.
Well, that was a basketball
right,
team.
I know, but the
Yeah.
basketball support.
But see, Kansas City's got 2 teams, the Royals and the Chiefs, and that's where all the ticket money goes. There's not enough left over to support other professional teams. Obviously, I mean, because they're not supported, and Kansas City just can't seem to sell tickets for, even though soccer's doing good. But when you look at it, that's only somebody that's seating, 5,000 or 6,000 people a game, maybe. And their players don't get you know, 15 million, 25 million dollars. I guess that's one of the reasons. But be that as it may,
Well, who ended up who ended up building and running Kemper Arena?
well, it was built by J.E. Dunn Construction Company.
And
The
that
hockey team went bankrupt. Then it was taken over in part by the American Royal used it, and was it AEG or somebody ran it to where they would get concerts and so forth. But then the dummies, and that's what I'd call them, when I ran for mayor in '03, one of my main things, if you look at one of my yard signs, no new arena.
Right.
What the hell you know, as we speak right now, this is 2013, there's still some 10 or 12 million dollars in star bonds owed on the Kemper Arena that haven't been retired yet. And
Wow.
here it's almost 40 years old. This city.
Well, so I guess my question is, just to put a fine point on it, is you went to all that effort, and then because of different considerations in the Kansas City area, you not being in the right country club, not being the right religion, or having too many vowels in the group of people, that you got pushed out of the way, and then somebody else ended up building the arena.
They ended up. Yeah, I'm surprised there's not a Ferris wheel being built down there. But anyway, you know, those are my stories, and I'm sticking with them.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more, but I think you have an appointment, or do you want to make a?
That's good.
You want to cut that off, and you want to make your call for
and
me?
then if you want, if